I just wanted to start off by saying, if you want an answer at the end, prepare to prepare to be disappointed. There just isn't one. I was an intern for at Nickelodeon Studios for a year in 2005 for my degree in animation. It wasn't paid, of course, most internships aren't, but it did have some perks behind education. To adults, it might seem not like a big one, but most kids at the time would go crazy over it. Now, since I worked directly with the editors and animators, I got to view the new episodes days before they aired. I'll get right to it without giving too many unnecessary details. They had very recently made the SpongeBob movie, and the entire staff was somewhat sapped of creativity, so it took them longer to start up the season. But the delay lasted longer for more upsetting reasons. There was a problem with the series 4 premiere that set everyone and everything back for several months. Me and two other interns were in the editing room along with the lead animators and sound editors for the final cut. We received the copy that was supposed to be Fear of a Krabby Patty and gathered around the screen to watch. Now, given that it isn't final yet, animators often put up a mock title card, sort of an inside joke for us, with phony, often times lewd titles such as "How C doesn't work," instead Rockabye Bill Valve, when SpongeBob and Patrick adopt a sea scallop. Nothing particularly funny, but when the related chuckles. So when we saw the title card Squidward's Suicide, we didn't think of it than a morbid joke. One of the interns did a small throat laugh at it. The happy-go-lucky music plays as is normal. The story begins with Squidward practicing his clarinet, hitting a few sour notes like normal. We hear SpongeBob laughing outside, and SpongeBob stops, yelling. And Squidward stops, yelling at him to keep it down, as he has a concert that night and needs to practice. SpongeBob says okay and goes to see Sandy and Patrick. The bubble splash screen comes up and we see the ending of Squidward's concert. This is when things began to seem off. While playing, a few frames repeat themselves, but the sound doesn't. At this point, the sound is synced up with the animation, so yes, that's not common. But when he stops playing, the sound finishes as if the skip never happened. There is slight murmuring in the crowd before they begin to boo at him. Not normal cartoon booing. That is common in the show, but you could very clearly hear malice in it. Squidward in full frame and looks visibly afraid. The shot goes to the crowd, with SpongeBob in center frame, and he is too booing very much unlike him. That isn't the oddest thing though. What is odd is everyone has hyper-realistic eyes, very detailed, clearly non-shots of real people's eyes, but something bit more real than CGI. The pupils were red. Some of us looked at each other, obviously confused. But since we weren't the writers, we didn't question its appeal to children yet. The shot goes to Squidward sitting on the edge of his bed, looking very forlorn. The view out of his porthole window is of a night sky. So it isn't very long after the concert. The unsettling part is at this point there is no sound. Literally no sound. Not even feedback from the speakers in the room. It's as if the speakers were turned off. Their status showed them working perfectly. He just sat there, blinking in this silence for about 30 seconds. Then he started to sob softly. He put his tentacles over his eyes and cried quietly for a full minute more. All the while, a sound in the background is very slowly growling from nothing to be barely audible. It sounded like a slight breeze through a forest. The screen slowly begins to zoom in and on his face. By slow, I mean it's only noticeable if you look at shots 10 seconds apart side by side. His sobbing eyes gets louder, more full of hurt and anger. The screen then twitches a bit, as if it twists on itself for a split second, then back to normal. The wind through the trees sound gets slowly louder and more severe, as if the storm is brewing somewhere. The eerie part is the sound, and Squidward's sounded real, as if the sound wasn't coming from the speakers, but as if the speakers were holes the sounds was coming through from the other side. As good as the studio likes to have, they don't purchase the equipment to be that good to produce sound of that quality. Below the wind and the sobbing, very faint, sounded like laughing. It came at odd intervals and never lasted more than a second, so you had a hard time pinning. We watched this show twice. So pardon me if things sound too specific, but I had time to think about them. After 30 seconds of this, the screen blurred and twitched violently. Something flashed over the screen, as if a single frame was replaced. The lead animator paused and rewound frame by frame. What we saw was horrible. It was a still photo of a dead child. He couldn't have been more than 6. The face was mangled and bloodied. One eye dangling over his upturned face popped. He was naked down to his underwear, his stomach crudely cut open, and his entrails laying beside him. He was laying on some pavement that was probably a road. The most unsettling part was that there was a shadow of the photographer. There was no crime tape, no evidence or markers, and the angels was completely for a shot designed to be evidence. It would seem the photographer was the person responsible for the child's death. We were, of course, mortified, but pressed on, hoping that it was just a sick joke. The screen flipped back to Squidward, still sobbing louder than before, in half in body in frame. There was now what appeared to be blood running down his face from his eye. The blood was done in hyper-realistic style, looking as if you touched it and you get blood on your fingers. The wind sounded as if that were of a gale through the forest. There was even snapping sound of branches, laughing, a deep brain tone, lasting intervals and coming back more frequently. After about 20 seconds, the screen twisted and showed again in a single framed photo. The editor was reluctant that we all go back. We all were, but he knew he had to. This time, the photo was that what appeared to be a little girl, no older than the first child. She was laying on her stomach. Her Barrett's was in a pool of blood next to her. Her left eye was popped out. Two popped out and popped, naked except for underpants. Her entrails were piled on top of her, above another crude cut along with her back. Again, the body was on the street, and the photographer's shadow was visible. Very similar in size and shape to the first. I had a chokeback bonnet, mitt, and intern. The only female in the room ran out. The show resumed. After 5 seconds after the second photo played, Squidward went silent, as did all sound like it. It was when the scene started. He put his tentacles down, and his eyes were now done in hyperrealism, like others were in the beginning. Of this episode, they were bleeding, bloodshot, and pulsating. He just stared at the screen, as if watching the viewer. About 10 seconds, he started sobbing. This time, not covering his eyes. The sound was loud, piercing and loud, and most feared inducing all of his sobbing was mixed with screams. Tears and blood were dripping down his face at a heavy rate. The wind sound came back, and so did the deep voice laughing. And this time, the still photo lasted for a good 5 frames. The animator was able to stop it on the fourth and backed up. This time, the photo was a boy, about the same age, but this time the scene was different. Oh my god. But this time the scene was different. The entrails were just being pulled out from a stomach, wound by a large hand. The right eye was popped out and dangling, blood trickling down on it. The animator proceeded. It was hard to believe, but the next one was different. We couldn't tell. He went back on to the next. Same thing. He went back to the first and played them quicker, and I lost it. I vomited on the floor. The animating and sound editors gasping at the screen. We saw the hand slowly. We left out the guts. We saw the kid's eye focus on it. We even saw 2 frames of the kid beginning to blink. The lead editor told us to stop. He had to call in the creator to see this. Mr. Illenberg arrived within about 15 minutes. He was confused as to why he was called down there. So the editor just continued the episode. Once the few frames were shown, all screaming, all sounds again stopped. Squidward was just staring at the viewer. Full frame of the face for about 3 seconds. The shot quickly panned out, and that deep voice said, "Do it." And we see Squidward's hand with a shotgun. He immediately puts the gun in his mouth and pulls the trigger. Realistic blood and brain matter splatters the wall behind him. In his bed, he flies back with the force. The last 5 seconds of this episode shows his body on the bed, one on his side, one eye dangling what's left of his head above the floor, staring blankly at it. The episode ends. Mr. Hillenberg is obviously angry at this. He demanded to know what the heck was going on. Most people left the room at this point, so it was a handful of us to watch it again. Viewing the episode twice, we only served to imprint the entirety of it in my mind and caused me horrible nightmares. I'm sorry, I stayed. The only theory we could think of was the file was edited by someone in the chain from the drawing studios to here. The CTO was called in to analyze when it happened. The analysis of the file did show up and edited by new material. However, the timestamp was a mere 21st seconds before we go viewing it. All equipment was examined for foreign software and hardware as well as glitches, as the timestamp may have glitched and showed the wrong time, but everything was checked out fine. We don't know what happened, and to this day nobody does. There was an investigation due to the nature of the photos. Nothing came of it. No child was seen, I was identified, and no clues were gathered from the data involved nor physical clues in the photos. I never believed in unexplainable phenomena before, but now that I have something happen, and I can't prove anything but it beyond anecdotal evidence, I think about it twice. There was once a guy living in our neighborhood named Jimmy. He got picked on a lot for being confident and funny guy. For being a confident and funny guy. His mouth tended to get him in a lot of trouble, and he seldom learned his lesson. He was just a very content with who he was, and refused to change it. When people asked him why he let them wail on him for his blunt comedy and wisecracks, he smirked and say, "Honestly, the best policy, at least they're not hiding for anything from me, and neither am I from them." One of the kids was inadvertently off with a rather crude MILF joke. Was something of a psychopath with a sadistic streak, who didn't take kindly to the insult. So he rounded up the other guys who didn't like Jimmy, and he cornered him after school in the science room. "You got your mouth into this. I want you to remember that," Brett, the ringleader, told him as he looked into Jimmy's terrified eyes. They grabbed some formic acid stored in the lab and threw it in his face. They stood around, watched him scream in the agony as it ate through his flesh before sniggering and running out, pretending to be concerned and wanting help for him. When the paramedics arrived and were attending to Jimmy, who was no longer able to scream, the principal asked the boys if they knew what had happened. Their leader, Brett, explained that they were walking past Jim when they saw Jimmy skulking around the lab room. By the time they got in there, he was already in that state. The other members joined and backed Brett up. with other fake details as if Jimmy tried to protest the silent agony. The principals nodded and told them he would speak to them after he had a word with Jimmy and got his side of the story after he was out of the hospital. A few days passed and Jimmy was kept in the ICU with bandages on his face. The doctors salvaging what they could of his face. His vision still intact in one eye, and his jaw was withstanding despite the loss of flesh. He was still unable to speak and refused to respond to anyone. He just sat there, eyes unblinking and staring at the ceiling, bloodshot and filled with animosity. He was discharged some time later. He would not respond to anyone with anything other than the word liars. His social life gone. Unable to smile or even crack a joke anymore. He self-included himself in his room and began to planning. Sick, insensitive thoughts started appearing in his mind. He would get them all in one by one. Just decimate them, slice them, burn them. He waited patiently until the group would vulnerable. Late at night, when they said their goodbyes and went home separately, that's what he would strike. That weekend, Brett received a package in the mail. Curiously, he opened it to find a VHS tape with the words "For You" etched crudely onto the front. He put it in and played it. It was a crudely recorded home video by an unknown cameraman who didn't speak at all for the duration of the film. It began with this camera pointing at the date on a newspaper. It was yesterday. As he zoomed out, you could see it. It was in a basement, flickering light bulb hanging above and casting an uncomfortable scene. By the time he'd completely zoom out, and apparent was no normal video. In front of the cameraman, in his hands and knees, was on one of Brett's friends. He was naked, a dirty blindfold around his face, with a crude gag in his mouth. He was covered in blood, or with burns, lacerations, and wounds. One particularly large one in his back stood out. That almost looked like a word. The cameraman, with his gloved hands, took the gag out of the crying boy's mouth, and immediately he begged it to go home. Please, let me go, man. I did wanted to what you wanted. Oh God, Jesse, Mike, Keith, you made me butcher them. I want to go home, man. Please, I'm sorry, guys. I'm so sorry. He just kept repeating over and over, rocking back and forth as he did so. Brett's legs began to shake, and he felt the bile rise his stomach. He could see the burnt, mangled bodies in the background. The bodies of his friends. All of them had markings on their body in deep, large cuts. The cameraman reached for the boy's chin and lifted it up, encouraging him to stand. As he did so, obediently, as he was slowly led to a door off screen, whimpering. Brett could see what the had been cut into his friend's back now. It was the word liar. The camera cut out temporarily. It was started again. They were no longer outside. They were instead in the cold snow on the outskirts of the woods. And it didn't appear to be the original man holding the camera anymore. It was Brett's friend. He was whimpering and shivering as he held the camera in one place for 30 seconds, pointing at some trees, distance, hearing footsteps draw ever in nearer. "Where are you, man? You said I could go, man! You said I could go!" The boy was screaming and crying, frightened out of his mind, as if the sound of crunching snow drew nearer from seemingly angled. It stopped. He turned around to see the mangled face of Jimmy. A horrifying howl blared through the speakers, and the word "liars" appeared before the tape abruptly stopped. Brett felt faint and darted to lock the in front of him in the door. Locked the front door, knowing what was coming. As he turned around to run for it, he immediately hit something and fell backwards. The last thing he ever heard was "liars," as acid ran down his face and began to slowly eat away his flesh. The last thing he ever saw was Jimmy's face, confronting into a sick, twisted smile. My sister had a teddy bear, a scary teddy bear. I do not know why, but it creeped me out. It was just so disturbing to me. The thing had eyes that looked so real. It was as if it was made from a real bear, and its face was blank and unsettling. I first started to get weird feelings about the bear when my sister first got it. She was only a baby at the time, and I was about 4. We had a dog, you see, and he had a habit of eating things, so my mother always had to put it up on the small cabinet in corner of the hallways, the upstairs. Every time when I went up to those stairs, I saw that creepy bear suddenly glare around at the corner at me, as if it was watching me. It wasn't the weird part. It started to get really weird about 5 years later, at the age of 6 or 7. My sister had lost interest in the bear, so my mom threw it in the old toy cupboard. The only problem was that the cupboard was in my room. When I was 9, old enough to stay on my own, and I go to bed without any assistance, I would get into my bed every night and turn off my lamp off. This is when it got scary. As I was getting some sleep, I suddenly remembered Mum putting that teddy in the cupboard. Slowly turned to look over across my room to see it through the glass. My heart suddenly stopped as I thought about the horrors the plush had caused me, but at the age of 9, I wanted to grow up and lose my fears. So I shook it off and put my head on the pillow. When I got up to pull my sheets on a bit further, I noticed something that would scar me for life. There sat at the end of my bedroom, the teddy. My heart started beating normally again. I sat staring at about a minute. When I needed to yawn, I closed my eyes. I opened them to see the teddy sitting closer to my bed. At this point, I was really freaked out. I started to move back to the wall and looked around to see if there were any sign that anyone had come in. When I looked back to see the teddy on the end of my bed, it startled that I almost fainted from fear. When I blinked, it had gone. I looked around to my relief. I saw no sign of it. I sat my head back down on the pillow, hoping for some sleep. Then I opened my eyes. It was above my head, staring straight down. I screamed as it lunged down at me. I will never see a bear the same way again. A few years later, after the years of horror, I burned it. I sat in enjoyment as the bear was turned to smoking ashes in my fireplace. I have lived as a teenage life through adolescence. The only thing I could remember was that in any way similar to my bad experience was when I watched Transpotting. That frickin' baby scene shocked me so badly, but other than that, all was well. When I turned 19, I was about to move into my new home. It had been given the keys to the house, and I was ready to set up my furniture. After hours of carrying, I carried the final box from the removal truck into the front door and shut the door behind me. I turned into the kitchen and put it on the table. When I opened it to see a cabinet, I took it out. I walked into my new living room, placed it in the corner, stared at it. And thought to myself, I don't remember packing this cabinet. I didn't really care much as I had moved into my new home. When I walked back into the kitchen to grab my television, brought it to the living room, that when I saw it, the teddy just sat there, staring at me. Have any of you heard of the Muppets show? Oh, why am I asking of this? Of course you know what the Muppet shows is. Before I tell you about this, the episode had no blood or people dying. It was like a Muppet Show episode, but it was kind of dark. If you were wondering where I got it at Disney World, which I went to 1 week ago, and it was a DVD with 23 episodes on it. And this one had the last episode on the DVD. It started with the beginning of the intro. but with some of the logo was falling off, and the wood was breaking. And we weared a mask on front of his face and painted in the gaps of its neck piece. When Kermit said,
"Now, for our special guest star."
Nobody cheered or clapped. When the other Muppets just sang, they were not there, and there were cardboard masks on sticks in their place. Kermit was singing in a deep voice, and he sounded sad. Then the other Muppets sang, and after the intro, the episode started with Kermit backstage. He was talking to cardboard masks of Fozzie, Miss Piggy, and Gonzo, and Animal. It's
okay, Kermit. They were jerks anyway,
said Kermit, copying Fozzie's voice.
Yeah, you're right, Fozzie. They left because they were junk,
said Kermit normally. This time.
And I would never leave my Kermit alone,
he squealed in a high voice.
Thanks, Miss Piggy,
said Kermit.
And they were pieces of trash and should never exist,
he growled.
Yes, Gonzo,
Kermit said, growing anger.
But it wasn't because of them. It's because of you pieces of filth.
Then he broke Gonzo's stick in half on his knee and ripped the mask. Then the masks started talking by themselves and the cardboard body parts and ran toward to Kermit. He ran to his makeup room and said,
They're not real. Not real, not real. I'm dreaming.
He pinched himself and nothing happened. And then he heard a voice.
Kermit, wake up.
It's time for your
medication.
Then it showed him in the doctor's office. And the doctor said, here's your schizophrenia pill. Oh, God. Sorry about that. I sometimes have horrible words mixed in.
Thank you, doctor,
Kermit said. Sighed.
Thank you, doctor.
Then the episode ended and the menu appeared. Unlike many gamers in the area where I live, I wake before anyone else in my home and play video games. It's now became part of my everyday lifestyle. This particular morning, I was gaining some more experience points, XP. On one of the first games I downloaded from the Xbox Live Marketplace. The game was called Naughty Bear, Panic in Paradise. The game given the lowest rating by ING for me. The easiest way to gain XP is to replay the first level. But as soon as I skip the screen where it shows if you have unlocked any new items, it opened up in a new level just called The End. And its thumbnail was a symbol when you haven't unlocked the area, but it took me a target information screen anyway. The information about this mystery level that the narrator who was in both games was, you have just sealed your fate, Naughty, prepared to feel pain. I thought this was some sort of nightmare level. When the level loaded up, I was surprised to see the radar showed a horde of hostile bears located from where I spawned, so I started sprinting forward towards some sort of bunker. After 5 minutes of sprinting, I found the bunker and started running in the darkness and somehow stood on some trap. Then the room brightened up. When the room brightened up, all the targets I killed were in many mauling naughty, like zombies mauling human flesh. I tried every button to escape whilst this was happening, but nothing worked. I used to like every game I played, but now I have varied option on every game I played.